try and clarify a little something regarding the last taping when I was trying to pull off that extortion scam on the public about those nude photographs that I was going to show to the press. If you didn't send me the $35,000. Right after it was the next day, somebody approached me that had seen that, and they said that when I said I had explicit nude photographs of myself that I was going to send to the press if they didn't, they said that I said exquisite nude photographs. And I thought, no, that's not true. But then this afternoon, somebody else came up and said it, so I began to think, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. So. I didn't know how hard up some people were for a hobby. It was something that we had mentioned before that I think you might find interesting now to sort of expand your exploration of, and that is the self-referral systems. They are, in every aspect, very subtle, but they are quite seeable. And they affect every possible aspect of man's secondary intellectual life. And tonight I even let a Kyroots slip in that pointed out that the ultimate self-referral system is indeed man. And if you looked upon any reasonably smart machine nowadays, let's take something that all of us can discuss as being reasonably smart. No, not computers. How about a furnace? Something down to the level of us all. Well, you laugh, more people. If your house was burning down, what would you say first, your computer or your furnace? You're right. So at any rate, take that, which is a fairly simple procedure, but nowadays, in all possible respects, just what is commonly referred to, and I'll accept the term, and you should, as smart machines, which have to do more and more. I wasn't going into a technologically based sociological message, but the days of machinery just doing physical work down at the primary level of replacing it, the machines themselves, if you notice, are being more and more replaced. That is, even though they're still important, that the heavy equipment is being increasingly replaced by computers in the same way that the heavy duty, the truck drivers, the front hole, back hole loaders that are in the part of your own nervous system at the bottom, they are being, assuming that you are up to date, they are being slowly, gradually replaced more and more by the need for intellectual serving machinery. And so for it to do that, they have to be in some degree smart machines, or else you're going to expend the same kind of energy. God almighty, how'd we get off on this? You understand, man started out with machines. He invented levers, and he invented Euclid and geometry and stuff. And he invented the International Harvester Corporation, and he invented caterpillars. He invented that so as to take some of the pressure off of his ever-loving back and muscles. But now it is more and more that the machinery is meant to replace him having to do this, or as they like to say out there in the world, I think, repetitive mechanical thought. I like the way they always throw it. They just like throw it in and dismiss it like, well, we all know that. That's the kind of thing we just let machines do. We sure don't get into that, do we, folks? No. But at any rate, so instead of just having to replace muscle, it is now replacing, in a sense, complementing, perhaps we should say, the operations of the higher end of the nervous system, not man's muscles, but his neurological activities. But for the machines to do it, you understand, they in a sense have to be sort of, quote, smart machines, or else, I know this doesn't make any sense, but surely you people can hear it, or else you would have, let us say a man had gone from building bulldozers, post hole diggers, shovels even, but he'd gone from building, say, caterpillars, into building computers of some sort, except the computers, if they were not in some way smart, even a furnace, but a computer, then he would, although this is not possible, I know it sounds like, but he would then have to go back and expend the same kind of effort running the computer. He would have to put forth physical effort to run that the same way as he would have to run to drive a bulldozer. You understand? In other words, he would have a smart machine, but it'd take so much effort to run it physically that he'd be having to go in there and like dig holes, lift it up and down, and expend all that. The point is, he'd be as well off doing it himself. So the machines have to be in some way smart machines. And that is based upon one simple fact, no matter what they describe it as. It is that they are in some way self-regulating, that they in some way will check back on themselves. That to take the furnace, it is like the thermostat, and it's got wired in relays, so that continually, once you set it to 70 degrees, it continually, through the thermostat and through the relays, it checks back with itself. When it gets below that, it turns it on. When it gets above that, it cuts it back off. A machine that does not have some ability to refer to itself, to check itself, although that seems very mechanical, and I'm sure that any reasonably intelligent person hearing this would not by any means make the egregious mistake of comparing their intellect in any way with such a piece of crude machinery. Oh. A piece of machinery nowadays, I assume you've got the point now, if it is not a mere piece of mechanical technology, if it does not in some way, which is still important, but if it does not in some way help him physically, an automobile so that you can move faster, or a shovel so that you can move more dirt, if it's not that, then it is in some way helping a higher end of the nervous system. And if it's doing that, to any degree, it is in some way a self-referring piece of machinery. That is, at the very crudest level, like a furnace, like the thermostat on your furnace, it must continually be able to refer and check on its own condition. Simple. No less is the secondary world of man. Absolutely no less. And it's not to take anything away from man. Oh, I'm sorry, I was thinking about a shopping list. But at an absolute minimal level of a piece of machinery nowadays, if it is not of the crudest sort of technology, that is, if it's not a bulldozer, for instance, then whatever else it is, if it is assisting man at the higher end of the nervous system, it is in some way self-referring. It is in some way able to check back on itself. And absolutely, without any doubt, you cannot separate that kind of self-referral from a piece of machinery that you could refer to, with no offense, as man being an energy machine in charge of transforming not only physical energies, material energies, along with all the animals, the plants, the photosynthesis process on this planet. Besides all of that, man is alone transferring, transforming. He is his own system, and it's this. And he alone is doing this. Speech, memory, everything that ordinary people believe makes man somewhat different from beavers and case bulldozers. That everything that makes man unique on this planet has to do with him transforming energies of a singular nature. And it's all here. Because everything else, he has in some way other participants on this planet. Plants and animals. Now, considering man absolutely dependent insofar as being able to transform energies, being absolutely dependent upon being able to check back on himself, that he can judge his temperature, he can judge his position, he can judge what the humidity is. He must be able to refer back to himself. Now, ordinary animals, surely you've already jumped that far, and that's no secret. If a furnace can do it, all animals can do it. And if we were talking about man separate map-wise into the primary and the secondary, then the primary, without any doubt, is self-regulating. You remember that from 10th grade biology. But consider a little bit further. If we were dealing with ordinary paleo thinking, as opposed to any sort of new intelligence, the Kyroot tonight pointed out that man, that the optimum self-referral machine is man, and the ultimate fuel is opinion. Ordinary thinking would tell you this, correctly at the ordinary level, would tell you that on that basis, that opinion, point of view about anything, doesn't matter what, that a man's opinions, a man's points of view are dependent upon what he is. Nowadays, I would say psychologically. If we were dealing with older people, they might want to drag in spiritual in some way. But they would say, no sane person would refute this if you just said everybody's opinion, their outlook, whatever term you like. They might want, well, that covers it all, because we do not mean it right now in some judgmental way that their opinion is any worse than anyone else's. But you would say that each person, just the same person, not someone who is psychotic, not someone who is a fanatic, but you would, ordinary thinking would have it that a man's point of view on anything is, without any doubt, dependent upon what he is. And nowadays, the most common background to that would be, psychologically speaking, that they would say, well, a man's point of view, and if they were really magnanimous, they might want to say, well, I'm not sure of the details, we don't have enough data in yet, but what a man is probably in part due to his heredity, and it's probably, they would say, obviously, in part due to his environment, his upbringing, his peer pressure, and etc. So everyone would accept this. All you've got to do is be sane, contemporary, sophisticated. That a man's point of view on any subject, a man's general outlook on life, all of his opinions, are based upon what he is. From a much more complex view, a neurorevolutionist might say that actually just being a man is dependent upon having a point of view. That it is not possible to be human. It is not possible, and I'm saying human now, to have a secondary realm operationally alive in you without having a point of view. Fools that we all are, I'm sure you're all hoping, along with me, that would ignite a bit more, but no matter. May I suggest it is, as always, a beautiful example that not just playing with words in some way, but that the very thing that I'm assuming you bought my story to start with here, that ordinarily, you and everyone else at the ordinary level, to talk about one's outlook, one's general attitude to life, points of view in general, across the whole spectrum, socially, politically, every way, that a man's point of view, without any possible escape, has got to be based upon what he is. That a man's points of view on anything, if you find out that a man grew up, say, as an abused child, and spent part of his formative years in an orphanage, then you, as well as anybody else, could come up with a kind of crude profile to probably pass off on a cheap syndicated talk show that you could show up as being Professor Winslow Wheat Futures. Well-known, little-known social critic. Or maybe you can call yourself doctor. What the hell do they care? And you could hear a man's opinions, and you could give some sort of probably meaningful profile that the crowd and fill and open and go, yes, oh yes, it sounds as good as anybody else. They're having to do with the fact that, well, the only way that a man could have this kind of opinion, the only way that a man would grow up having these kind of opinions would be based upon the fact that he was abused. Because if you did not grow up as an abused child, see, the guy's here with a book he wrote, or he's here that he's starting a new organization to do with abused children, and you know from any ordinary level that the guy is there with a book, he seems to have a certain amount of interest or passion in the subject, and he gives his opening statements, and then the interviewer says, well, tell us about the abuse of your childhood. Nobody ever thinks about this, but it's not possible. The man's not going to say, oh, I was never abused. Oh, I had a great life. I just kind of stumbled into this. I thought it was a fertile field, and I thought, hell, I'll write a book on it. That is not the way life works. That is not the way life collectively and sanely works. Not insanely, and sanely. So, back to where I was trying to drag you back down the primrose path, I want you to see that it's not to set up a phony row of mechanical ducks to take a shot at in a minute. That is simply what ordinary, contemporary, reasonable, even beyond reason, sophisticated, educated intelligence would tell that a man's points of view, specifically and in general, just a man's general personality. You see a guy's personality and he seems to be kind of open and free and happy. That you said, well, that's his general point of view of life, an optimist. Then who in the world, what sane person, and you know the answer already, what sane person would believe, that would say, well, let me speculate. I can't tell whether he's a Sagittarius or a Rotarian, but there's one thing obvious from seeing his attitude, there is no doubt whatsoever. That man was mistreated like a dog when he was a child. Well, you're an idiot. You understand that. Because it is just the accepted reality, because it is reality at that level. A man's points of view are dependent upon what the man is. Right, all right, God damn it, we got that covered. Except for this. At that level, you can't be a man. To be a man, you've got to have a point of view. You would not exist did you not have some general points of view, specific, general, if you did not have a general attitude. Throwing in attitude and etc. Could open it up to, as if it mattered, to ordinary people trying to drag in the idea of emotions or one's passionate attitude toward life and other people. But it's all dependent upon whether you are to the point of where we're talking about of the nervous system being alive here and talking. And if it's doing that, it's still a point of view. It doesn't seem intellectual because, as you jolly well know, we're talking about a continual, non-fragmented spectrum going from the primary, going from the limbic system, going from all of the primary physical reactions and sensations of life into this. You can't separate it. It's only this that says you can. And at the ordinary level, when it says you can, who's going to say you can't? It takes somebody extraordinary to realize, well, you can't separate it. The corn is dependent not only, I do the simple one, it's dependent upon the dirt. It's not just dependent that way it seems to be, but it's also dependent upon the sun, dependent upon the weather, the clouds. But at any rate, that which seems to be the ordinary people would want to call intellect cannot be cut off if you rip off. Pull out the corn out of the ground. If you pull out the secondary from the primary, you can say, well, I got it here. You may have got it there, but what you got is dead corn. You do not have anything alive, you cannot separate it. So anything about a man's attitude, points of view, encompasses what might be thought of ordinarily as his personality. It's just not the way that the intellect, especially in the Western world, thinks now is not the kind of plotting it does, because it would want to say that a man's general attitudes, in other words, take a crude one, that everyone's either a pessimist or an optimist. Then ordinary intelligence wants to say, including academically, the level of psychiatry, they would want to say, well, now that is more a matter of passion, and you're going to have to separate to discuss this intelligently. You're going to have to separate it from pure intellectual activity. Now, that's the way they do things in the city. But you've got no attitude. You can't be a pessimist unless you can talk. You can't be an optimist unless you can talk. You cannot be happy in the human sense unless you can think. You can't be unhappy as a human unless you can think. Thus it is I was trying to get you to see that it is not just a reversal of the words or the description, but wherein you could describe reasonably that everyone else, including you at that level, that everyone's points of view, everyone's opinions are dependent upon what kind of man they are, with a little m, whereas it is more revealing, at least for a second if you see it, to say that to be a man is dependent upon having a point of view. Because it is easy, if you were listening with one ear, some of the things that Kyroots and we talk about on some nights would make it sound as though that points of view and attitude are certainly to be avoided, or that they are less than a full telling of what's going on in life, and ordinary people can knock attitudes and views, and they do, and they normally come in under at least subheadings or modifiers of prejudice and bias and half-truth that ordinary people, if not philosophers, would want to say, all right, there is a difference between just points of view, because a man can say, well, my point of view is that they would just take the Serbs and the Croatians and just slap those mothers around and tell them to sit down and straighten out and quit fighting each other. And then somebody that lived over there, or somebody who was an international political observer, could say, what a provincial, small-time view. You have no idea, sir, what you're talking about. You do not know the deep-rooted, racial, nationalistic conflicts running deep there in that part of the Adriatic. What has driven these people? And they would say your point of view is not necessarily based upon reality. It may not be indicative of any objective truth to this situation. What I am calling a point of view, what I'm calling opinions, cannot be separated from what the ordinary intellect would want to call objective knowledge, superior knowledge. I didn't intend to make that too complicated, but you surely know it. There is no difference at that level. Now, there is out there in the game, in the hobby of it, but there is no operational difference between a man, our representative in the UN. There is no difference between his attitude, even had he been an expert at one time on Yugoslavia, when it was still Yugoslavia. Somebody going to write me? Did anybody get the... I won't run it. Those of you who weren't listening good to Kyroots. But a man who is an expert on what was Yugoslavia before the recent unpleasantness, before it began to get the shakes and come apart. But there is no difference operational between a man who is the world's leading expert in Yugoslavian affairs, in the history of Yugoslavia, all the little details of Yugoslavia, even how you can spell it in 3 different ways. There is no difference between that operationally and some guy who reads Time magazine 6 months after it's out. He borrows it from his brother, and he has dyslexia, plus he's got a drinking problem, and he's got all these half-baked ideas. In fact, sometimes on a warm day, he still thinks that Tito's alive and running the place. So from an ordinary view, he'd say, well, no, wait a minute. There is all the difference in the world in this guy's opinion, his points of view. I mean, he's just mouthing off about that he doesn't like the Serbs, and I don't even think he knows what he's talking about. He thinks that that's one of the teams that moved from Brooklyn, and At any rate, you do understand that at the city level of educated, sophisticated affairs, what could normally be called people's viewpoints, their opinions, might be a little valid, some valid, they might be acceptable in polite company, but the mind wants to distinguish between opinions, points of view, and cold hard facts. But at the operational level, there is no difference. There is none. Now, out in the world, I know damn well there is. Even I know that. Out in the world, because if you're going to play the game, you've got to go by the rules. And out there they say, oh, there's a lot of difference, because what I just said cannot be operationally true because there's no difference. Nobody'd go to school, nobody'd be an expert, everybody's opinion would be as good as everybody else's. The game would not be going on. The secondary world would have collapsed. But operationally speaking, there is no difference, because if you can try and turn it in a sense a little backwards, it's not that people's opinions, it's not that people's viewpoints are dependent upon what they are, because you can go from there to saying, the cruder version I started out with, that this person has certain opinions about Yugoslavia because his mother was frightened by a photograph of Tito. To go from that to saying, well, now this person has very specific information, they have been over there and studied, they have spent their life doing that. And to think, well, whatever their opinion is now of Yugoslavia is going to be colored by what they are, their background. At the ordinary level, that's true, or people would not have tried to have a what? Background. Who would go to school, who would study. But operationally, you are not making any distinction between somebody actually knowing what's going on, because part of the process, part of the purpose of having viewpoints, even if they were called information, even if they were called hard, cold facts, is to make you a man, is to make you a real person. Because, to put it another way, we'll turn it halfway back inside out over sort of 45 degrees port, or from your view, perhaps starboard. If you took an ordinary person and you extracted, forgetting what your definition of opinions and views would be, just call it all of their intellectual storehouse. If you extracted it, what would you have? Literally, you would have a non-person. You would have a vegetable. Now I'm making no distinction between I have good information, I have bad information, I am well educated, I am not educated, I have some opinions, I have some hard facts. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter how you distinguish, well, I have some opinions and I have some facts. I think I have a lot of facts on a particular subject, but I will admit that my view may be colored a bit because my father used to be a part of this. It doesn't matter. The distinction is only important to the ordinary game, just to the sport. It's only ordinary consciousness. Ordinary thinking can take that seriously. I'll admit you're supposed to. But rather than seeing, as ordinary people would, that whatever a person thinks is some sort of product, is some sort of output based upon what they are, try and turn it almost inside out a little bit, and then almost 45 degrees askewed, and you're getting closer. And when it's just as simple as you can, it's subtle, but it's quite seeable, and when you see it, that's part of, I would suggest that that fellow who wrote in Tonight, as per Kyroots, he said he was intrigued with the idea that man might be able to think anew and think afresh, and he wanted to know, in essence, what he was asking was, since I'm smart enough, or since I can see enough to think that would be perhaps a very good thing, if I'm that smart, why is it that I cannot do it? And there's a reason. At a polarized level, the reason is that it's impossible. How can you beat a simple answer? Because at an ordinary level, a man is not a man. You're not even secondarily alive. You are really no more than a vegetable. You may be helping through the, I understand, rather extensive cost involved now by keeping someone hooked up to machinery, you may be helping pay a doctor's son through college. But so I guess you can say that you're serving some purpose. But if you do not have points of view, if you do not have opinions, if you do not have attitudes, you're not alive. And so you understand, everybody else sees it the opposite way. They're supposed to. But it's always been true. It was true religiously, that they would say, well, tell me what you believe, and I'll tell you what you are. And you tell a few things, and they go, aha, you're obviously I would say that you're a northern Madagascar pagan. And you see, and somebody else says, well, my religious beliefs are so-and-so, and you go, aha, Southern Baptist. Aha, Greek Orthodox. You could do it with politics. You could do it with anything, and it seems true, because it is true at that level. To say, well, this man's opinion, what he believes, is a direct reflection. It's inescapable. It's due to what he is, but it's almost more operational. From a more complex view, it is certainly more instructive to almost try and look at it backwards. And rather than being involved, well, wait a minute, your view is much too limited here in religion or here in politics. Here you are claiming to be a dyed-in-the-wool, irreversible Marxist, and look, every form of Marxism right now has collapsed here in 1990 to 1991. How can you still uphold that? That you apparently are attacking his unfounded, his ill-founded opinions and beliefs. One of the great things about life is not only that the world's big enough for everybody, and you've always got Montana and Alaska and Siberia, remember, but also tied into it, believe it or not, is one some of you liked a few nights ago, is that everything that everybody else says is meant to be taken seriously. Whatever a man's opinion is, if a man says, well, I'll tell you exactly. And let's say that up until right now, he looks fairly sane, dressed up. He said, I'll tell you exactly what's happened. The problem in Yugoslavia, I'll tell you exactly what happened. Tito was buried without any underwear on. And his spirit, without any doubt, knowing how they are in that part of the world, without any doubt, his spirit is uncomfortable. And it in some way is running through the collective consciousness of those people, and it is renting asunder what was earlier a fairly reasonable country, albeit with a funny name. But now look, you could say, well, that's insane. It doesn't matter. If you took that away from whoever said that, you would have nothing as far as that person was concerned. The man would be slain. It makes no difference. I just did an extreme example. But it makes no difference to say, well, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't take that seriously. But notice if a man stood here and apparently was serious, got on TV, or you went and showed up at some kind of forum, and this man stood up, and he did just about what I'd said. Some sort of little intro, here he is, so-and-so, expert on Northern Mediterranean affairs. And he gave you this quick thing about Tito being buried sans underwear, and that's what was going on. Think about it, if you'd gone to all the trouble to go to that forum, that lecture, paid to get in, you wouldn't be a bit upset? And you could say, well, the man's an idiot. You know, who held you down and put a gun to your head and said, well, take all idiots seriously? Every time you hear idiocy in life, take it seriously. Because the ordinary mind is going to go, well, now wait a minute, you're playing around again, because it's not that I take it seriously in that sense. That is, I don't believe for a second that Tito's spirit is in some way disturbing the collective consciousness of that whole area because he was buried without any underwear on. I don't believe that. But what gets me is they'll run some kind of forum like this, or a guy will write a book, and I'll go show up, and some goddamn idiot will get up there and try to pull that crowd. Did I go too fast? I was talking slow. Can we do it again? Did quite ordinary sane people say, no, you're picking on me, they say. You're picking on me incorrectly. Because I don't take that seriously. I don't believe in religion anymore. I don't believe in astrology. I don't believe in a one-party system. I don't believe that Marxism is the right way. I don't believe that democracy should run all possible countries. I don't believe any of that crap, necessarily. So I do not take idiot opinions of somebody who has some kind of idée fixe in any kind of field. Somebody that has some sort of very parochial viewpoint. I do not take that seriously. Because some of these people are idiots. So, but you don't take it seriously. Well, not idiocy, I don't. And there's no doubt you can spot it when you see it. Hey, what, I look like a fool? Am I here idiocy? I recognize idiocy. And I don't like it. I mean, the world's got to straighten out. Too many people are religious. Too many people are still politically naive. Too many people are still victims of a class structure. Who knows what they're going to say? But you notice, the secondary world will survive. It is that what other people say is meant to be taken seriously. Even idiocy. Even points of view. Well, no. Points of view are not to be taken seriously. Factual information. Or perhaps an educated, if we're somewhat lacking in facts, such as what actually brought about the destabilization of the previously known country of Yugoslavia. I'm not sure that we have all the facts. We're too close. The situation is still in flux itself. It is changing even while we stand here and talk. And I think it's going to take a certain kind of historical perspective to get a real hard intellectual fix on it. And so any opinions we have right now are simply that. But now there's some opinions better. If we take somebody who has been our representative to Yugoslavia in Washington, I'd be more interested in hearing, even if he says it's his opinions, I'd be interested in seeing his take on it right now. But don't drag in some cockamamie cab driver from Snellville, Georgia, and say, what do you think has brought about the destabilization of Yugoslavia? And he says, well, I understand that the man that used to run that country practiced witchcraft, or as they say in Alabama, his speech stank and he didn't believe in Jesus, so it doesn't surprise me. And you think, no. Then if you're ordinary, you'd say, there's the difference. There is just some kind of worthless opinion, just a point of view of some idiot. But over here at least, and the man admitted, this expert, our man who used to be an ambassador to Yugoslavia, he admits that as close as we are and the situation is still expanding and growing, that it's hard to put an absolute fix on what happened. But he has some opinions. He can say, well, now, there's obviously a few things that contribute to that, and he starts telling. And you listen. If you're ordinary, you say, well, all right, now there's a difference between that. He admits that some of that is still his somewhat incomplete, his inchoate take on the matter. But there's a difference between that and this guy over here that thinks that Tito was a communist or practiced witchcraft or was Count Dracula in disguise. That's a real point of view. That's idiocy. And the more what? The more intelligent the people are, the more what? The more seriously they dismiss idiocy. Well, if anybody's listening next time, maybe we'll pick it up again. But do not take any of this seriously. Which is one of the dirty tricks, of course, of having explicit nude photographs of yourself